And so David Bell was the founder of Parkour, and that was about
Hmm.
3 decades ago. So you were very much there when you're at the forefront, really, the coalface of when parkour kind of took off in Australia and across the world. So,
Yeah,
and I imagine in that period of time, I remember when social media was probably when I started on social media was probably about 6 years ago. And even then
hmm,
you could post, a photo of you jumping or a shirtless pic or an apple or whatever it is, and it'll just blow up. You'd get thousands of likes.
yeah.
And now it's really changed. Do you think you're also lucky in the respect that you got in early and you were able really to grow your profile and personal presence online?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, I began social media like the day I started parkour. I
Yeah.
was founded on YouTube, so I started making YouTube videos, started getting on the forums before that was even like a huge takeoff for parkour. And then really when social media came in, I was always kind of begrudging about starting the new app or making the new profile or whatever, but I just did it because that's the landscape. I wanted to be a professional athlete. That was one of the avenues to pursue that through. And then yeah, it's just about treating those things like a job for me. That was the difference. Wasn't ever like it wasn't ever on my Instagram to be like, oh, here's my lunch, here's me with friends. Like, no, this is a parkour profile. It's here for parkour and nothing else.
Yeah.
And just day in, day out trying to feed that in some way and getting in early before the kind of huge emergence of Instagram and TikTok like taking over. I was very much set up in a way where all I had to do was continue posting those things. And as you said, they didn't always have to be the greatest things in the world early days, and they were still getting attention. And then, understanding that beast itself and learning the game a little bit has been a huge curve over the years where
Yeah.
you're finding like you don't want to be doing, as I said, you don't want to be doing things or creating things for content pieces, but you also want to be capturing them in a way that is
Yeah.
going to sell online. So it's a balancing act in
I
that way.
think, yeah, I think what you say there is definitely correct, and a lot of people would resonate with that. I think David Goggins has talked a little bit about it too, and I kind of share his sentiments a little bit. I hate being on social media, but you kind of need to do it. If you're doing a podcast, you're not on social media, you're not going to get your podcast out there. If same thing with him, all his motivational messages, he needs to be online sharing things, and so regardless of, and I know you don't like spending too much time online, but for what you're doing, there is no real professional opportunities aside from say like sponsorships, but a lot of which is done through media online and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. And even if you're doing other avenues like opening a business or running classes or doing
Yeah,
all of these things today, social media is such a huge
big
part
part.
of everything.
Yeah,
It's a great tool for promoting and getting yourself out there. I've been able to use it very personally in that way to create sponsorships and jobs and that sort of thing. But as you said, even if you're doing a podcast, you need that to be on cross platform. You need to be bringing that back in.
and so how has parkour evolved in that respect? So is there a push now to have more, structured, specific competitions in place? Is there competitions? I'm not too sure, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the developments in that space.
So yeah, over the years, there's been a huge development of parkour competitions where originally it was very independently run.
Yeah.
Gyms or little organizations would run it. Then we had some huge sponsors like Red Bull come in and create Red Bull Art of Motion, which was the pinnacle competition for years in the sport. And that really created a lot of professional avenues for athletes. Being one of the 16 athletes competing there generally meant that you were permeated into this wider community and going to more different events all across the world and having a career online and those sorts of things. And then we saw now the Federation of Gymnastics has started to have their hand in parkour, which half of the industry feels positively about, half feel negatively about. They're setting up their own competition, which is great because it pays athletes and it gets them representing their country in like a legitimate arena. Unfortunately, the competition courses are a little uh,
Yeah.
outdated, for lack of a better word. They're not quite the pinnacle peak performance of parkour that we want to see.
Right.
But then we have individually run competitions still. Those the companies that I mentioned earlier that were gyms or groups of sponsored athletes and stuff like that started competitions. So we have an interesting individual world circuit that isn't tight knit in the sense of you can go dot your way through here, and then like you can't go to the Federation Gymnastics competition, then the air whip challenge, and then the other thing and become all in one. But we're seeing one competition in particular, Sports Parkour League, who's making huge headway in that arena. I'd say they're the most legitimate parkour competition in the scene, and they now have a qualifying series where they have 4 or 5 competitions throughout the year, or some based in America, some based in Europe, and ideally they'll get one down in Australasia that are like our World Series, and that's the closest thing we have to a circuit right now. And it's still building, it's still like coming along. And COVID was a huge knockback for a lot of those individually run events.
Yep.
So we're only really seeing a re-emergence from COVID now over these last few years.